to go to one of the most beautiful places in the world, and you're not sure you want to go, and they're going to pay you to go, And he goes, I'll go. If you don't want to go, I'll go, And so we went down there, and when we got down there had been another dentist who had been there for about 9 months, and he saw a total of 5 patients in 9 months. Because he was having trouble setting up the equipment and getting everything organized and supplies, and it was just kind of a logistics nightmare. And the equipment was not installed yet. We had dental chairs, x-ray machines, compressors, vacuum pumps, and it had not been installed. So I went there to visit the island. I was actually down in the Caribbean visiting my wife's family in Trinidad, and when we got down there, I went to St. Vincent. The equipment was not set up, and I was trained as an engineer, and I used to be an apprentice Porsche mechanic, so I've used tools a lot. So we started installing the equipment in the clinic, and we were installing an x-ray machine on the wall, and there were about 5 or 6 pastors who had offices below the dental clinic, and they came up, and they had never seen anybody work like that before. So they all put chairs around the side of the room, and they watched my wife and I as we're installing the equipment. They were just astonished that someone could do that. And so we got the clinic going, and it turned out to be a wonderful blessing. We were down there for about 7 years, and we had patients who were prime ministers, vice presidents, governor, ambassador generals. We had really good clientele, and we were visited by Israel Leoto. Have any of you ever heard of Israel Leoto? He was the president of the Inter-America Division, based in Miami, in Florida, and he came down to visit us, and he goes, how can you possibly run any kind of medical clinic on this little island where there are no trained staff? You have no help that's trained at all. How can you do that? He goes, you need a dental hygienist, a dental assistant, a sterilization technician. You need a front office manager, custodian, all these things. How do you do this? And I said, my wife is a registered nurse. He goes, oh, now I understand. And so my wife was the dental hygienist, the dental assistant, the front office manager, sterilization technician, and she was also the cook for the clinic, the nurse for the clinic. She did everything. And during one of the board meetings, one of the board members asked me, now they're very sensitive about costs down there, and they said, is your wife being paid? When we were down there. And I said, my wife is being very well paid. Now they were concerned because, why? How come we are not getting paid like this? And they said, well, what is your wife's salary? What are you paying her with? How much is she getting? And I said, she's getting lots of hugs and kisses. So she was a volunteer down there for the whole time we were down there, and we had a really wonderful experience. And when we came back, now our agreement when we went down there is that we would go down for 6 years, and then my wife had an associate degree in nursing. And I said, we'll go down for 6 years, and then you apply to Loma Linda for the BS degree in nursing, and we'll come home and you'll get your BS degree. So she applied, she got accepted, and we ended up coming home. And when I got back to Loma Linda, I was offered a job to work at the dental school as an assistant professor because they like missionaries to work there to teach the kids how to be missionaries. And shortly after I arrived, I met a Dr. Milan Maskala from Bangladesh, who I used to work with in Bangladesh when we were missionaries there. And I was surprised to see him in Loma Linda, and I said, what are you doing here in Loma Linda? And he goes, well, my wife is trying to get into the nursing school, She's tried for the last 3 or 4 years and she can't get in. And I'm trying to get a job at the dental school. But I can't, I'm not having any luck. And he goes, what are you doing here? I said, well, my wife got accepted into the nursing program, and I got offered a job here at the dental school. So he just kind of did a slow burn when he heard that. But anyway, so I teach at the dental school now, and it is an extremely rewarding experience because you get, I work with the dental students who are, I think, some of the brightest, most energetic, most well-mannered people that I've ever worked with in my life. They're all trying really hard. They're all trying to do the right thing. And I'm not used to working with people like that. I'm used to working with people that are difficult and stubborn, but these young people are really enthusiastic. And so it's a real dream come true to work with them. And I'll sometimes stay in the lab with them, helping them till 7:30 or even 10:30 at night, trying to help them. And the students really appreciate it a lot. Now, but one of the first things I did at the school is I worked in the oral diagnosis department. And we would have really difficult cases come in. We would have patients who had been to outside dentists, and they'd say, you're too sick for me to work on you, go to Loma Linda. So I had patients that were taking 24 medicines, 27, 31 different medications coming in, and we have to sort this all out and figure out how do you take care of these people. And it was really, really trying. And it was really a trial by fire. Now, and so I started thinking about how do you do diagnosis? How do you arrive at the correct diagnosis or treatment plan for a patient? And I want to relate a story that was told to me by Dr. Larry Thomas. He's an emergency room doctor who lives in Loma Linda. And he said one of his colleagues was in the ER, and a 7-year-old boy was brought in unconscious by the parents. This boy had been unconscious for about 4 or 5 hours, and they brought him into the ER, and nobody knew what was wrong. And they did CBC blood tests on him, all the routine things. This took place about 35 years ago, before they had CAT scans and MRIs in every hospital, so there was no real fancy equipment for them to use. So he did a couple blood tests, and nothing was remarkable. So the doctor can't figure out, why is this boy unconscious? And he's looking in the lobby of the emergency room, and he notices that there's a couple of kids running around that look like they might be related to this young Mexican-American patient. So he goes out there and talks to these kids and goes, is this your brother here? And they go, yeah, that's our brother. And he goes, what have you been doing this summer? And they said, we were playing. And he goes, well, what did you play at? And well, we played baseball, and we went to Disneyland, and we went swimming in the hot springs up at Lake Arrowhead. There's some hot springs up there. Now, this physician had been reading every 6 months, the county of San Bernardino published a health letter for physicians and nurses. And it happens that they had tested the water in this hot spring, and they found a bacteria that causes amoebic meningitis, an infection of the brain. So here's this boy that is unconscious. He had been about a week previously swimming in this lake, and so the doctor, he ordered a lab test to check for this amoeba that causes amoebic meningitis. But that test takes 3 days for the culture to come back. So we immediately started him on the medication for amoebic meningitis, and by the time the lab test came back, the child had recovered. And so he saved this child's life by prescribing a medication for which he had very little scientific evidence or proof to assume that that was the right medication. But it was the right medication, and he saved his life. Now, and I started seeing cases like that where the doctor or the dentist would arrive at a diagnosis before they had all the data. And I started wondering, now I was a physics major in college, just like Jim here, except you got your master's in it, didn't you? Yeah, I just have a bachelor's. I get a master's in electrical engineering. But I was trained in the scientific method. And the scientific method is formulated by Francis Bacon, teaches us you collect the data, and you analyze the data, and then you form a hypothesis. But that's not what I was seeing at least in the really difficult cases. It was the opposite of that. You'd have a few, maybe shards, little pieces of evidence, and then you would form a conclusion, and then you go back and order more lab tests to confirm or refute your diagnosis. So I was seeing a number of cases where it was the scientific method in reverse. You arrive at a diagnosis first, and then you go back and try to find the evidence to support your decision. And I started thinking about this a lot and wondering what was going on. And I would actually like to propose that a doctor often works backwards from the scientific method. You collect the data after you've formed your hypothesis. And I would like to use, let's see. Well, Dr. Hanna Kaliova is kind of an example of this reverse scientific method. She has presented a lot of convincing scientific evidence that the Adventist health message is valid and useful. But when was the Adventist health message formulated? Before or after she collected her data? Before. 100 years before. Okay? So she's actually an example of this kind of what I would call the physician's scientific method. You have an idea, a hypothesis, and then you go back and you look for the data to support it. And it's amazing. Ellen White's health message has been incredibly fruitful, I think, and it's really valuable. I have a twin brother who's not a Seventh-day Adventist. He loves to go hunting, and he goes hunting 3 or 4 times a year for elk and deer and all sorts of things. And he's got his freezer stocked with venison. And he looks about 15 years older than I do. And he's been through 2 divorces. I'm still married. I don't know how my wife puts up with me, but I'm still married. And she actually says she likes being with me, which astonishes me. And but I think that I'm still married and I'm still reasonably healthy. I'm going to be 70 years old in August. So I feel like I owe a lot to the Adventist health message. And I think it's been really good for us. But now, I started reading a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution by Thomas Kuhn. And it is one of the best books I have ever read outside of the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy. And in this book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, Thomas Kuhn, this book was written about 40 years ago, he proposes that he's talking about how science changes. And he was a physics major, so this will be a little bit dense, but he told the story of Copernicus and Tycho Brahe and the early astronomers who formulated the heliocentric theory of astronomy. We used to think that the sun went around the earth. In other words, we used to think that the earth is the center of the universe because it looks like everything's going around us. But there was an astronomer named Tycho Brahe, and he had some like protractors with arms that were 40 feet long, and he could measure the angle position of a star. 300, 400 years ago, an observatory was not a telescope, it was protractors, giant protractors set up to measure the positions of the star. And he he collected data on the position of all the planets, the really bright stars that we see when we look out at night. And he had volumes and volumes and volumes of data charting the position of the planets. This data did not fit the Earth-centered theory of the universe, because you have retrograde motion and you have a planet going very slowly way, way out, like Uranus or Jupiter, and the Earth is coming by, and as you pass it, it looks like the slower planet is going backwards when you pass it. That did not fit into the Earth-centered theory. But when Copernicus formulated the heliocentric, or the Earth goes around the sun, they went back and looked at Tycho Brahe's data, and the data fit. It fit perfectly. In fact, Kepler wrote his 3 laws of planetary motion, now based on the heliocentric theory. I don't know if you remember the Kepler's laws. A star or a planet sweeps out equal area in equal amounts of time. I won't bore you with all the scientific theory, but now the data fit. That data had gone, it was meaningless for 100 years, and it wasn't until a new theory came along that people were able to accept it. And it was really interesting when Copernicus formulated his theory, and later Kepler formulated his theories, the laws of planetary motion. He had gotten a hold of a copy of Copernicus's book, where a German mathematician bought Copernicus's book, where he outlined the theory of the Earth is going around the sun, not the other way around. And it said the Earth is going around the sun in circles. A German mathematician read that book, and everywhere in the book where it said circle, this mathematician had crossed it off and wrote ellipse. And now Kepler came along with this copy from this German mathematician, saw ellipse, and he said, ellipses fit. Circles don't, but ellipses fit. So there were a number of interesting events that happened. But a lot of what I would like to propose is that a lot of diagnosis that we do both in physics and in medicine is actually a reversal of the scientific method. You get the theory first, and then the data comes later. When Darwin formulated his theory of evolution, there was no data to support his theory, but he believed that the data would come later. Now, we as Christians interpret that data differently, but now scientists say his theory has been confirmed. I disagree with that, but this is another example of where the evidence to support the theory came long after the theory was proposed. And I think this is what we do in medicine a lot.
Absolutely.
We actually formulate the theory before we have the proof. And I want to give you some examples from my own personal experience. And when I was working in St. Vincent, we had a patient come in, and I said, "Why are you here?" And he goes, "I have a toothache." And I said, "How long?" And he goes, "I don't know how long, at least 15 years. I've had a toothache as long as I can remember." And I said, "Have you been to any other dentists?" And he goes, "Yes, there's 12 dentists on this island, and I've been to every single one of them. They've examined me, taken full x-rays, and they say there's nothing wrong." And now I'm worried, okay, because I am not smarter, don't think I'm smarter than anybody else, and have good reason to believe otherwise sometimes. And I'm praying for wisdom. But when this patient came in, and I said, "Why are you here?" He goes, "I have a toothache." And he went like this. He pointed down here. So I took full mouth x-rays. I didn't see anything on the x-rays, but I remember that he pointed down here. So I thought, well, maybe there's something at the bottom of the mandible that's bothering him. And I went into the refrigerator, and I found this x-ray film that was about the size of a playing card, which I had never used before. And I put the film in his mouth sideways, had him tilt back, move the x-ray machine twice as far away, and the inverse square law says if you double the difference, you have to quadruple the time. And so we took radiographs, and there was a horizontally impacted tooth at the bottom of the mandible. It was right down here at the bottom of the mandible. Now, there's a facial artery that comes right up across there. It's a dangerous place to do surgery, and a nerve there. So, and I had never done any surgeries like that before, and I was like scared witless. I said, you need to go to an oral surgeon and have this removed. And he goes, I just went to the oral surgeon on the island. He told me everything's fine. There's nothing wrong with me. He goes, you found it. You can fix it. And I argued with him, but he insisted that I do the surgery. So I went in and did the surgery, and I actually went down through the mandible, drilled a little hole, maybe less than a 1/4 inch in diameter. It was probably 4 or 5 millimeters in diameter, down through the bone. And there's, right where I was drilling, there was another nerve that comes out through the mental foramen, inferior alveolar nerve. And I'm trying to avoid that nerve as I'm drilling down, and I'm sweating bullets. And I finally got down to this tooth, and it was infected, and this volcano of infected pus explodes out of the hole, and it's going over this bone that I cut. And I thought, oh no, now the bone's going to get infected, and he's going to swell up and look like a watermelon over here, and he'll end up in the hospital. And I'm thinking to myself, I killed him. I know I killed him. He's going to die. And so anyway, we irrigated. I didn't have normal saline, so I was using anesthetic to irrigate this thing out. I must have used maybe 15 carpals of anesthetic just to irrigate. That was a little risky too. But anyway, I was able to see it. I cut it in little slivers, and after over an hour and a half, I removed it. I put him on antibiotics and pain meds and sent him home. So I should have called him that night, but I was so certain that I had killed him that I didn't call him that night. I called him the next day. I was shaking in my boots. And so I called him up, and I said, Bill, how are you doing? Is the pain medicine working? And he goes, pain medicine? I don't know. I go, what do you mean you don't know? Didn't I write you a prescription for Tylenol with codeine? And he goes, yeah, you gave me a prescription, but you told me to take it if it hurt. And it didn't hurt, so I didn't take any of it. I mean, you could have knocked me over with a feather. And I said, well, did you, what about do you have any swelling there? And he goes, I don't know. Let me go look. So he went to the bathroom, looked in a mirror, and he came back. He goes, no, there's no real swelling. And it's a little tender, but I kind of expected that. But it's getting better. So I felt like after that experience that the Lord was guiding me and helping me and showing me what to do to take care of this patient. And I got much better results than I should have gotten, especially at my level of experience in oral surgery. And that's kind of been my experience as a dentist, is I feel I get better results than I should. And it's not because I'm brilliant or as clever as Hannah is here. She's very good scientifically. That's not one of my gifts, actually. And I'm very glad that there are people with those gifts. But I feel like the Lord will guide you through whatever profession you're in. If you're a doctor or a mother or a teacher, a housewife, whatever you're doing, a lawyer, the Lord can guide you and show you what to do so that you'll get much better results than you should. And I count on that. Every day when I go to work, I expect to see miracles happen. Amen. And when I was working in the diagnosis department, I was helping the students with diagnosis, but we had a critical care center at the dental school, and people would just walk in with swelling and toothaches and things. And if the doctor there, who's a friend of mine, couldn't figure out what was wrong, he'd send them over and say, here, you look at them and see if you can figure out. And we could always figure out what was wrong. And I was going, what's going on here? Now, There's a passage in Isaiah that has been very meaningful to me. This is in Isaiah chapter 28, and it starts with verse 23. Isaiah 28, and starts with 23 onward. And in this, God is talking. I'm going to explain it before I read it to you, because when I listen to anybody, when someone's talking to me, I don't listen to what they're saying or what they've said. I listen to what they should have said. Okay? I translate what they're saying into a form that makes more sense. And I learned this. I used to work in a mental institution. I was not actually an inmate there. Maybe I should have been. But I briefly worked in a mental institution, and I had people that couldn't articulate well, and they would say things, and I kind of learned if I could rearrange their words, it could make sense. And so I was out at a restaurant one day, and there was a man in front of me, and he was trying to order his food. It was a fast food restaurant. I hope you'll forgive me for going into a fast food restaurant, but that was a long time ago. But they couldn't understand him, and the clerks there just kind of go, no, next person, we can't understand you. But I found if I just took his words and rearranged the order, they made perfectly good sentence. So I ordered the food for him. I'd listen to him, rearrange the words, and order the food. And then after he got his food, he came down and sat with me and some other friends that were with me. And I carried on a conversation with him for about half an hour, or 20 minutes, half an hour, while we were eating. And nobody else could understand a word this guy said. But it made perfect sense to me. I just rearranged everything. And so when I listen to people, when you listen to people, I don't listen to so much exactly what they said, but what they mean to say. And you have to give, and if you do that, you can make people look intelligent and clever and wise. And I always try to do that, especially when I talk to my boss. Whatever he says, I translate that into something that makes more sense. And then I follow up those orders, and usually it works out pretty well, usually. But you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. And we have to give God the benefit of the doubt. We have to assume that He's intelligent, that He's doing what's best for us, that He loves us dearly, and that, even the hardships we're going through, there's a reason that we're going through them. Now let's get back to this passage in Isaiah. And I'm going to paraphrase it. Now the Lord's talking to Isaiah and says, and apparently Isaiah was a farmer, because the Lord says him, as I paraphrase it, "Who taught you how to plant barley and wheat and fennel and spelt and all these different crops? You plant wheat in a row, you kind of make a little furrow and make a row, and you bury it a little bit in this row. Cumin you scatter. All the seeds are planted in different ways at different times of the year in different kinds of soil. They're harvested differently. They're threshed differently. Some you thresh with a stick. With wheat, you have to drive a cartwheel over it to thresh it, to break over the husk. And they're winnowed differently, and they're all done differently. And the Lord says to Isaiah, "Who taught you how to do all this?" And Isaiah goes, "I don't know." And the Lord says, "I taught you how to do this." And I read that. Now, is God a God just of farmers? No, He's the God of mothers and doctors and nurses and teachers and insurance agents and everybody else. And so if He is talking to Isaiah and says, "I taught you how to do this," I read this passage, and what it says to me is, I'm going to teach you what you need to know to do your job. And so now when I go to work, I'm confident, I have this hope that the Lord is going to show me what to do for each and every patient that walks in. And I feel like I see miracles happen every week when I am working on patients. I get much better results than I should. And well, let me read you the passage, and you're going to see that I paraphrased it generously. But as I say, whenever I read any passage in the Bible, I try to translate it into something that's meaningful. Now that has a couple of advantages in that I'm much more likely to remember it if I translate it into something that's more meaningful to me. And I think you'll have the same results. Because if I just read a passage, I tend to forget it. I have to be an active reader. I say, okay, what does this mean, and how does this apply to my situation? Okay. So here's the Lord talking to Isaiah, and he says, "Give ear and hear my voice. Listen and hear my speech." This is Isaiah 28 and verse 23. And I'm reading, I think this is the New King James, although there are some better translations of this particular passage. "Listen and hear my speech. Does the plowman keep plowing all day to sow the crops?" These are rhetorical questions. The Lord's asking Isaiah, is this what you do? Okay. "Does he keep on turning the soil and breaking up the clods? How does he know when to stop? When he has leveled the surface, does he not sow the black cumin and scatter the regular cumin, plant wheat in rows, the barley in its appointed place, and the spelt in its own place? For the Lord instructs him in right judgment. His God teaches him. For the black cumin is not threshed with a threshing sledge, nor is a cartwheel rolled over cumin, but black cumin is beaten out with a stick, and cumin with a rod. Bread flour must be ground, therefore he does not thresh it forever, breaking it up with his cartwheel. He doesn't do this, or crush it with the hooves of his horse. This knowledge all comes from the Lord of hosts, who is wonderful in counsel and excellent in guidance." Amen. Now, Christ promised, he goes, "It is better that I leave, because if I leave, then I will send you a counselor who will teach you all things." Now we have this, as Christians, we have this incredible promise that I've promised you the Holy Spirit who's going to guide you and lead you and instruct you and give you wisdom and knowledge. And I feel that if we are willing to humble ourselves and let him guide us, that he will give us divine wisdom. And I expect all of you to go out and do the impossible when you get out and start doing your jobs. I was talking to a young lady today, Liliana, and I was telling, she's thinking about going to dental school. And I said, when you get to dental school and you graduate, or even when you're working in the school as a student, you are going to be the best doctor in the world for every patient you work on. Because you're going to be compassionate, you're going to listen, you're going to do what's best for the patient. Unfortunately, there are a lot of doctors that do what is most economically at least dentists. I have no experience with the physicians, but I know there are a lot of dentists that I've had patients that have gone to their dentist, and the dentist has a treatment plan that is $66,000 for them. And I'm just kind of astonished by this. Actually, tomorrow, in Sabbath school, I'm going to tell you stories about patients like that. But we have to always think about what's best for the patient. And if you're doing that, I think God will protect you. And I remember once we had a patient come in and they had their third molars removed by another doctor in our clinic. And when you do that surgery, about one patient in 100, the lingual nerve, the nerve that supplies the tongue, usually comes in this way, but sometimes it crosses over right behind the third molar. And if you're removing it and you're cutting a flap to take the tooth out, you can cut the lingual nerve and the tongue is paralyzed. This happens rarely, and we've actually figured out how to mitigate this so it doesn't happen hardly at all. But this event happened about 25 years ago, and apparently the doctor didn't fully cut it, but he nicked the lingual nerve. So the patient came in and they were talking to me, and they couldn't talk clearly because their tongue was possibly paralyzed. So as soon as I heard the patients speak, I go, this is going to be a lawsuit. There's going to be a lawsuit here. And I didn't even know if I wanted to see the patient, because I thought once I see the patient, my name will go on the lawsuit. But I thought, I think I better see her. And I talked to her, and I called 3 oral surgeons. I made 3 pages of documented notes. I found a physician in San Francisco that can repair lingual nerves. That's his specialty. It has to be done fairly soon after the injury. If it's more than about 48 hours, it's very hard to do. But I referred her up there, and she never went. I said, we'll pay your airfare, we'll pay for all the surgeries, your expenses, hotel, food, everything. But she didn't go. She didn't go because she went, and after she saw us, she went and saw her attorney. And the attorney, of course, they want the patient to appear in court looking pathetically crippled. So the attorney told her, I think it would be better if we get this all straightened out before you go to any more doctors. So he advised her not to go and get it repaired so that she would appear crippled in court, which is I think was a really mean thing to do to her. But it did go to court. I mean, they did file a lawsuit. And I later heard that she went and talked to her lawyer and said she wanted to put everybody's name who worked in that clinic on the lawsuit, but leave Dr. Trott's name off because he was really nice to me and he tried to help me. And that's happened to me about 2 or 3 times. And I feel like the Lord is protecting me and guiding me. And you know, if I don't have that protection, the Lord's constant guidance, I would be scared witless. Because there are so many things that can go wrong in medicine and in dentistry, and you'll get sued for it. But I feel like the Lord is guiding and protecting me. And it's not just as a dentist. I remember I was in the Army. I served in the Army and was sent to Vietnam many years ago during the Vietnam War, and I was a secret documents courier. My job was to carry secret documents, and I had a little briefcase that I carried around, or a map case actually, with documents that I had to deliver to various bases in Vietnam. And there was a helicopter assigned to me, and the pilot's instructions were to go wherever I told him to go. So we did a lot of sightseeing, and we actually delivered a few messages. Actually, Vietnam, I found, was a very beautiful country if you go to the right places, and I actually enjoyed my stay there very much. But while I was delivering documents in the imperial capital, the city of Hue, which is in about the middle of Vietnam, and it's an ancient city, and it has walls around it that are about 12 or 14 feet high, and these walls are thick enough you can drive a Jeep around the top of the walls. It's an ancient city and fortified. It's got walls on all 4 sides, and it has a river. 2 rivers come together, and it's built right in the confluence of where the rivers meet. So it's very well protected, an ancient city. And I'm walking down the street with this bundle of documents I have to deliver, and I've got a .45 handgun in my hand in Marine ready position because I'm walking by myself. And I'm walking down the street with this .45, and you're scanning all the time to see if someone's going to jump out from behind a building and shoot you, because I was alone. And in the Army, you try never to do anything alone. You always want a few thousand others, Army people with you to protect you. There's protection in there. But I'm walking by myself, and about right where the cameraman is down there was a building that ended, and another street, and this 12, maybe 14-year-old kid jumps out from behind the building with an AK-47. And I was maybe 20, 30 feet away from him. Now, one of the things they taught us is that you have 1 second to make a decision. You either flee or fight. If you wait 2 seconds, you're dead. And something very unusual happened. When I saw this young, he was maybe 14 years old at the oldest, maybe 16 at the most, jumps out from behind the building with this AK-47. I had a rush of adrenaline, and time slowed down. I've never had an experience like that before, but what took 2 seconds seemed like it took about 2 minutes in my mind. It was like slow motion. Everything was going on in slow motion. And I'm going, do I shoot this kid? Now, he's got a machine gun, I've got a pistol. And who's going to win? He's going to win, okay? So I'm thinking, and this is all going really rapidly, but I'm holding the gun like this, and the kid freezes and stares at me for just a fraction of a second. And so I reach into my backpack, I was carrying an army rucksack, and I pull out this big, giant Mars candy bar about this big. And I hold out this candy bar to the kid, and the kid sees this candy bar, and he drops the machine gun and comes running. I mean, there's a lot of hungry children there, and he grabs the candy bar and devours the candy bar. And I thought, oh my God, this could have ended up really badly. Now, I don't think he was a professional soldier, because if he was, I would have been dead. He wouldn't have hesitated for 1 second. He would have immediately aimed and fired, but he didn't. He was just a kid. So, but I look back on that event. Now, I've had friends who were also in the service in Vietnam, and they got involved in combat, and they shot a few people, and they came home, and they were never the same after that. My best friend went to Vietnam, was involved in combat. He was a foot soldier there, and he had some injuries. When he came home, he started using lots of pain medicine. I guess there's an epidemic of opioid abuse in this country now. Well, he got addicted to the opioids, and they weren't strong enough, so he started buying street heroin, and he got caught, and he got thrown into Cook County Jail. When he finally got out of jail, I went and visited him, and I said, what was it like in jail, in Cook County Jail? And he said, I can't tell you what they did to me in the jail. So apparently some really horrible things happened to him. But he was never the same after that. And I think if we take a human life, where, something disappears, we're not the same afterwards. And I felt like the Lord was protecting me with this candy bar, And I think that whatever we're doing, whatever situation you're in, that if you're counting on the Lord to guide you and protect you, He will. Whether you're a soldier or a nurse or a doctor or a housewife, the Lord will give you the wisdom you need to get out of really difficult situations. And I actually had other experiences like that when I was in Vietnam, and I'll tell you some more tomorrow. But I really believe that, well, maybe I'll just summarize this whole lecture in one sentence. We need to be divinely inspired when we're doing diagnosis so that we can know what's wrong. Now, how do you arrive at a diagnosis? Well, we have a laboratory, a simulation lab at Loma Linda University, where there's a patient examining room, and they have an EKG and pulse oximeter and a few simple test equipment there that like a physician would use. And they bring in this patient who's actually an actor. It's usually one of the other doctors or someone. And they'll have like a dental student or someone working on them. And this patient will feign a heart attack or a stroke or something going on. And they have present in the room a physician, a nurse, a pharmacist, and a DDS or maybe a dental student. And so now this dental student can consult with the physician and the nurse and the pharmacist to try to arrive at what's the proper treatment. And they do remarkably well. They always arrive at the right diagnosis. But how often does a dentist or a nurse have a physician in attendance, a pharmacist there? This is a really unrealistic situation. I don't think I've ever been in this. If I want a pharmacy information, I have to call up the pharmacy, and sometimes it takes me 2 or 3 days to get the information I need. So they're calling this interdisciplinary education, and they're trying to get the physicians and the dentists and the nurses and the pharmacists all to work together. But have any of you ever seen a clinic that ran that way? And I'm just kind of like astonished by this. And so the method that they're teaching, I just wonder if it's really going to work. So I'm slowly coming to the conclusion we need divine guidance for whatever job we're doing to have the insight to solve the problem. And I'll give a couple more examples. We had a patient come in, and I said, "Why are you here?" And she goes, "I just want my teeth cleaned." And so the dental student, this is at the Loma Linda University, the dental student worked up the patient, took radiographs, went over their health history, and about an hour later the student calls me in to verify their findings. And I said, as I ask every patient, "Do any of your teeth hurt?" And the patient goes, "No, none of them hurt." And I'm watching her, and I'm thinking to myself, what's this all about? And so I'm curious now. So I lift up her cheek where she was pointing, and I found a little spot that was maybe a 1/16 of an inch in diameter, maybe 2 millimeters in diameter, a little brown spot. But she had freckles, so she had brown spots all over. And I did something I've never done before. We have something called a periodontal probe, and it's about 1.5 centimeters long, about 3/4 of an inch long. And it's 1 millimeter in diameter. It's very small diameter, a 32nd of an inch in diameter. And it's used to look for infections around the gums. And if it's right around the teeth, you can use this probe. But if you're using it on soft tissue, you have to use anesthesia before you probe in. And I did something I've never done before. I looked both ways to make sure the clinic director wasn't watching me. And I took this probe and I pushed it through this brown spot, and it went in about 1.5 centimeters with no resistance, and I pulled it out, and the patient didn't feel any pain, and pus starts draining out of the abscess. So I told the patient, I said, "You have an infection, we need to take care of it." So I tell the dental student, take this patient over to the endodontics department and have them diagnose this and see what. I said, "This patient has something wrong." And he goes, "But Dr. Trott, I just took the patient to the endo department and they said everything is fine. I took them there because there's another tooth that had a root canal and it looked a little questionable on the radiograph, but they said, so what do you want me to tell them?" And so he hadn't seen the pus coming out, so I lifted up the cheek and I started massaging it, and pus comes out. And he sees this pus coming out, and he goes to the patient, "You have an infection." And the patient goes, "Dr. Trott, how did you find out my chief complaint?" I've had a toothache for 2 years. I went to 2 other dentists. They did full mouth x-rays. I told them it hurts over here. They examined me, and they said nothing is wrong. They didn't believe me. They thought I was lying, that I was a hypochondriac, that I was trying to get out of work or something, and they wouldn't believe me. She said, "What am I going to do? Nobody believes me." She said, "I've heard that they have really good doctors at Loma Linda, so I'm going to go to Loma Linda, and I'm not going to tell them anything, and I want to see if they can find out what's wrong." "So how did you find out that I had a toothache?" I said, "It was easy. You told me." She goes, "I didn't tell you. I deliberately didn't tell you anything." I said, "Oh, yes, you did. You told me twice that something was wrong." She goes, "You mean from that you figured out I had an infection?" I said, "No, you just showed me where to look, and we just looked very thoroughly." And she goes, "I am so glad I came here. I am really glad. This is unbelievable." And so she became an ardent supporter of Loma Linda University. But I'm not, as I said, I'm not smarter than anybody else, or wiser, or have better vision. I have 2200 vision. But it has some advantages because my vision has worsened as I've gotten older. And my wife, who I've been married to for 26 years, has no wrinkles at all. So she still looks as beautiful as the day I married her. And, well, and I could tell you more stories. I think we're going to run out of time here in a little bit. But I really believe we need divine inspiration for every job that we're doing, every problem that we're trying to solve. And he has promised this in Isaiah. He says, who showed you how to do these things? If he can show Isaiah how to be a farmer, he can show you how to be a mother or a librarian or teacher or whatever you're doing. He can show you. And I believe that we as Christians have an incredible advantage in the guidance of the Holy Spirit to show us what to do and what not to do. Now, and he can give us wisdom. I had a patient come in, and he was retired. His only income was Social Security. He was getting about $700 a month Social Security check, and he had to pay rent and food and everything on this. And he was missing about half of his teeth. He had what I call an alligator bite. Have you ever watched an alligator? Their teeth don't meet together. They kind of interlock so that when they grab you, you can't escape. And so this patient had an alligator bite. None of the teeth really met. And a specialist came over and said, this is a very difficult case. It's too difficult for you as a dental student to work on this patient. We're going to have to refer them to a prosthodontist, and it's going to be very, very difficult. And so the prosthodontist came over, and it was going to cost, even at the dental school prices, which are lower, it was going to cost the patient like $20,000. They were going to do like 9 implants and all this expensive thing. And the patient goes, I can't. There's no way I can afford this. I could never afford $20,000. And so I said to the dental student, I said, maybe we could make partial dentures for this patient. It would be much more economical. But you do know this is a very difficult case. And we need someone with a little bit of experience and a great deal of wisdom and excellent training to take care of this difficult patient. You do understand that. And the dental student goes, yeah, I know this is too hard for me. And I said, we need someone really gifted. Who can we get who's really talented, very observant, to work on this patient? So I pointed to the dental student, I said, we need someone like you to work on this patient. And he goes, me? I go, yes. I said, you are the only dentist in the world that can help this patient. If he goes to an outside dentist, it's going to be not $20,000, it'll be $40,000. If he goes here to the specialist here at the school, it'll still be $20,000. The patient can't afford it. If he goes to, it said, it's either you or nothing. Are you willing to accept this responsibility? The student goes, well, of course, I'd be happy to help, but will you help me? And I said, sure, I'll help you, And so the student worked on the patient, took care of him, made him partial dentures, and did a really good job for them. And I told the student later that to remember that for every patient you work on, you are going to be the best doctor in the world, because you're going to take into consideration their financial problems. You're going to do what's best for the patient. You're going to be compassionate and caring, and you're going to bend over backwards to try to help this patient. Nobody else is going to do that. And so you're going to be the best doctor in the world. And when you get out, now a lot of our young dentists graduate and they work for, we have corporations in California called Western Dental, and they have offices all over, and they do, I've heard nightmare stories, like a patient goes in to have a tooth extracted, and when you give an IA block, it's to put the mandible to sleep, it takes about 5 minutes for the anesthetic to work. So this patient goes into Western Dental, they give an injection. This is a story a patient told me. He said, they gave the injection, he put the syringe down, picked up the forceps, and immediately started extracting the tooth. And the patient's going, no, it's not asleep. And the doctor goes, it is asleep. I gave you anesthetic. Now shut up and hold still. And extracted the tooth, and the patient said it was really painful. I had another patient when I was in St. Vincent that went through an experience like that. And he used to be one of our dental assistants. He went to the government hospital because he was now going to nursing school there, and he thought he should be loyal to the local hospital. And they did that to him. And he said they had 2 nurses. Now, in St. Vincent's, the nurses look kind of like this. They're very well-fed, and they were like both over 200 pounds. He had 2 nurses sit on top of him to hold him down while they did this extraction. And he came over, and this young man was about 6'2" and 220 pounds, and he was crying when he came in. I'd never seen him cry before. And he couldn't believe they did that. So there are some, unfortunately, dentists who are not very thoughtful. There's an article in Atlantic magazine that was published last month about doctors who abuse their patients. And I'm sad to say, now not all dentists are like that, but some, maybe 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or maybe more than that are. And so you have to kind of be really careful. But we try to teach the students to always do what's best for the patient. And I don't believe, and I'm going to try to wrap it up here, I don't believe that we can really do that on our own wisdom, our own strength. I don't care what profession you're in, what your job is. If you are going forward just based on your own wisdom and your own guidance, you're going to crash and burn eventually. You need divine guidance in everything we do. Now, but we are going to have problems. I'm not saying that every day is going to be a wonderful day. I have had many days where I come home crying because things don't always work out. You are going to have problems. In this world, you will have problems, one of the apostles said. So it's not going to be a bed of roses, but I would like to encourage you and promise you that if you live in such a way that God can bless you, if you follow His instructions and guidance, He will guide and lead you, and you will get much better results. And I'll just close with one more story that will appeal to you as Seventh-day Adventists. I had a 22-year-old young woman come in, and one of the games that I like to play is I will look at a patient's x-rays before I see them, and I'll try to guess their age. So I'll bring up the x-rays, I won't look at their chart to see, I'll look at the x-rays and try to guess their age. So I looked at her x-rays, and she had lost about 2 or 3 millimeters of bone around all of her teeth, and you usually don't see that till someone's about 75 years old. As you get older, you lose more and more bone around the teeth. In fact, the American Indians had an expression when someone was old, advanced in years, they said they were long of tooth. Because as you get older, the teeth, when you're young, they look like this, but as you lose more bone, they look like they're getting longer and longer. So they said they were long of tooth. And I occasionally hear that expression, oh, that design is a little long in tooth. But we don't use it very much anymore. It's fallen out of favor. But I looked at her x-rays and I thought, this patient's about 75. I go and there's a 22-year-old woman there, and I was like dumbfounded. And when I walked into the room, there was already a gum specialist, a periodontist, talking to the patient and said, well, we're going to have to do some bone grafting on you to try to build these bones back up. And you're going to have 4 surgeries. Each surgery will be about the school prices, it was going to be about $3,000. So it's going to cost $12,000 for the surgery to try to build a bone. And they're not very successful surgeries. Sometimes they work. A lot of times they don't. So as the periodontist is leaving, he says to the patient, is the rest of your family like this? She goes, yes, my mother and father, their teeth are loose. Even my brothers and sisters, their teeth are getting loose. He says, bring them all in. We'll do surgery on all of them. So now, how could a whole family of people, now maybe the mother or the father has a genetic defect or something and they're losing bone prematurely, but not both. That's really statistically a statistical anomaly. So I start talking to her, and I'm being a Seventh-day Adventist, I start talking about, diet and water and things. And when I get to diet, I say, so how many servings of vegetables did you have yesterday? She goes, none. What about today? None. And I said, so you don't eat vegetables? No, I don't eat vegetables. And I said, well, what about fruit? Do you have any fruit? Do you eat fruit? She goes, no, not really. I don't dislike fruit. I just don't eat it. And I said, well, what are you eating? She goes, well, I live at home. This was a Mexican-American family. And my mother does all the cooking. And all she cooks is beans, rice, and meat. That's all she ever makes. So no vegetables and no fruit. So what do you suffer from if you don't eat any fruit or vegetables? Scurvy, right. What's one of the symptoms of scurvy? You lose bone, your teeth get loose. So she was a 22-year-old American patient suffering from scurvy because she wasn't taking in enough fruits and vegetables. And so I told her, you need to start eating at least one serving of fruit and one serving of vegetables every day, or this is going to get worse fairly quickly. She goes, that's funny. My physician just told me the same thing. And so I think as Seventh-day Adventists, we have a different perspective. And now I talk to my patients about diet and water. I live in Southern California, and not far away is Palm Springs, which is a desert. And when you live in the desert and it gets to be 105, I was in the desert one day and it was 119 degrees. I'm sorry, 117 degrees. And I was working as a bricklayer. I had a summer job, and I would take a hose about every half an hour, and I would just wet myself with the hose from head to toe because it was so hot. And just staying wet helped me stay a little bit cooler. But we have a lot of patients that live in the desert, and they get dehydrated because they don't drink enough water. And one of the things I've noticed when you get dehydrated, there's a gland up here, and I was going to do a PowerPoint on the physiology of the parotid gland, but I didn't want to bore you all with it. There's a parotid gland here, and it actually acts like a secondary kidney. When you are dehydrated, it removes minerals from the blood plasma, because you have to maintain mineral concentration in very narrow limits, or you'll start getting cramps or headaches or even seizures. So you have to maintain a narrow range. And if that starts to get out of range because you're dehydrated, there's too many minerals in the blood plasma, the parotid gland will actually start dumping them into the saliva. So in a way, this is my theory. I'm trying to write this up. The parotid gland acts like a baby kidney in a sense, and when you're dehydrated, to try to maintain homeostasis in the blood plasma, the osmolality of the blood. So I talk to my patients. If I see them they're building up calculus quickly and they live in the desert, I ask them how much water they're drinking. And I get answers like, I don't like water, or I prefer beer. When I have a patient say that, I know we're going to have a big problem. But I try to get them to drink more water. But the other dentists I work with, they don't believe this theory of mine, and one of them wrote a letter of complaint and went up to the dean, and the dean kicked it down to my department chairman, and my department chairman called me in and said, you are wasting time talking about things that have nothing to do with dentistry. In other words, diet and water have nothing to do with our health, at least according to my department chairman. And I've learned not to argue too much with people, because when I argue, I always lose because I make them angry, and then you lose automatically. And all I said to her is, you know not of what you speak. But I think as Seventh-day Adventists, we have a wonderful perspective, and we can offer things to our patients that nobody else is willing to even investigate. Look at what Hannah is doing. She's investigating, at a cellular level, the effects of a good diet on people. And, I really admire what you're doing. I wish I could do that. And You're extremely compelling and convincing. And I'm going to get a copy of this video or download it from the website, show my wife, because she's pre-diabetic, and I think she really, really needs to see this. But I want to thank you for what you're doing. And I think you're doing it, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think you're doing it partly because of your perspective. Is that right, would you say? Okay, so I think that if we would all take the Adventist health message to heart and follow up on it, that maybe we will someday be as brilliant as Hannah is. God is brilliant. Right, He is brilliant. And He says He gives, if any of you lack wisdom, ask God, and He will give abundantly. So, and we can see an example of that today. So I want to thank you all very much, but I would like you to remember that God can guide and bless you and guide you with the Holy Spirit, and you will see much better results in everything you do if you let Him guide and lead you. Thank you very much. May God bless you.